Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries.
November on Lake Superior is notoriously brutal, but the gale that struck in 1886 brought a lethal combination of hurricane-force winds and a sudden drop in temperature. Rain turned to blinding snow, and freezing spray crystallized instantly on anything it touched. On the morning of November 19th, after the worst of the storm had finally passed, the La Pointe lighthouse keeper looked out over the shallow waters off Long Island. Sticking up through the freezing surf were the tops of 3 wooden ship masts. When a rescue tug reached the site, the crew found an incredibly grim scene. 3 sailors were lashed high up in the rigging, completely encased in up to 6 inches of solid ice. They hadn't drowned. They had climbed the masts to escape the lake and frozen to death waiting for help. 4 days earlier, those men had set sail on the Lucerne. Built at a cost of $55,000, she was a massive 3-masted commercial schooner outfitted with brand-new heavy-duty canvas. In 1886, she was considered one of the most resilient vessels on the Great Lakes. Yet somehow, a ship built specifically to withstand heavy seas ended up shredded at the bottom of Lake Superior, resting in barely 24 feet of water. Because every single man on board perished, there was no one left to explain what went wrong. To reconstruct their final night, marine archaeologists had to dive the wreck decades later, treating the surviving hull like an underwater crime scene. The Lucerne was loaded with over 1,200 tons of iron ore and bound for Cleveland. But shortly after clearing port, the barometer crashed. Facing zero visibility in heavy snow, Captain George Lloyd aborted the run and tried to steer his massive vessel back into the sheltered waters of Chequamegon Bay. During their survey, archaeologists mapped a specific mechanical failure at the bottom of the hull. A ship's centerboard, a retractable wooden keel used to keep the vessel stable, was found jammed down into its housing trunk at a sharp 30-degree angle. In the chaos of the storm, the crew was likely navigating blind in the shallows with the centerboard lowered. When the heavy board struck the sandy seafloor, the forward momentum of the ship turned it into a massive lever. It swung violently upward, transferring the entire force of the impact directly into the ship's internal framing. We know this because the ship's keelsons, the massive longitudinal timbers that formed the structural spine of the vessel, were found completely shattered right above the centerboard trunk. The Lucerne essentially broke her own back. Immobilized, severely damaged, and trapped in the freezing surf, the ship and her crew were now entirely at the mercy of the crashing waves. The forward deck held another physical record of those final hours, a heavy iron crowbar shoved directly into the gears of the starboard windlass, the winch mechanism used to raise and lower the anchors. As the crippled ship pitched violently in the heavy seas, the massive anchor chain likely began paying out uncontrollably. To stop it, a sailor had to crawl out onto the heaving, water-drenched deck in pitch blackness and manually jam an iron bar into the screaming gears to lock the chain in place. While the crew fought to secure the ship above, the situation below deck was just as dire. When sport divers investigated the Lucerne's cast iron heating stoves a century later, they didn't find coal or standard firewood inside. They found the charred remains of the ship's own wooden furniture and cabin partitions. The plummeting temperatures had burned through their normal fuel supply. Stranded in the dark, the crew resorted to tearing apart the inside of their own cabins just to keep a fire going and stave off severe frostbite. These physical scars in the wreckage rule out any idea that the men gave up easily. They fought a brutal war on 2 fronts, battling failing heavy machinery on the frozen deck while literally dismantling the ship beneath their feet to survive the cold. Eventually, the continuous, violent pounding against the shallow bottom pulled the whole seams apart. Freezing lake water rushed into the hold. Weighed down by 1,200 tons of iron ore, the Lucerne settled firmly into the sand. The mechanical pumps were likely frozen solid. With the freezing water rising fast across the deck, the crew had exactly one option left. They abandoned the shelter of the cabins and climbed high into the exposed rigging, trading an immediate death by drowning for a slow death by freezing. The speed of that final evacuation was painfully obvious when the bodies were recovered. One 40-year-old veteran sailor was found wearing 5 heavy overcoats. A 21-year-old boy next to him was found with no coat at all, wearing only a pair of boots. The floodwaters caught him entirely unprepared. Today, the remarkably intact hull of the Lucerne still rests in 24 feet of water. It is a sobering grave, but the shattered spine, the jammed windlass, and the burnt cabin walls remain as a permanent archaeological record of extreme human endurance and a fierce will to survive.